Okay, maybe I can start, and then we can spiral into a conversation between the two of you, and we'll include the audience as well. I don't really have like a specific, like direct question, but I would like to continue on this, what you touched a little bit on, Louis. This idea of like, ensemble, collective, like this kind of difference here. And what maybe we can expand on in relation to that is something that you, Beth, call improvisational realism as a mode of working, and that you, Louis, now at the end called like the way of working as free improvisation. So it's kind of has this yes, exactly. So maybe in relation to that, to kind of try to come to this idea of ensemble, collective.
Yeah. Thank you. That I really found that super interesting. I guess I don't care what we call it. Yeah. I guess that's my first comment. But I think the resonances between what you were describing as a performative mode and intention and what Karrabing thinks of as a performative mode of intention, they would, I wish I wasn't the only one here, they would find it really super interesting. In terms of, and I should say, I'm going to say something first about, say, performative practices that I think will resonate with you, and then how we do the film or something like that, which matters. So everyone in Karrabing grew up doing a specific kind of performance style that's called wanga, and in it, you know, there's the singers, but even there's a singer, but the singer always has 2 or 3 singers, right? And they play off of each other, and then there's 2. So there's always more than one, even, and they sing together, and then each one breaks out and has its own style. And then the other parts of the group, you know, the men dance together their way, and then the women dance together their way. But then each, if you want, you don't have to, but if you want, you break out and you show your individual style, and then you go back in, right? And that was the, so then in actual performances, one group has their way of doing it, and then another one slightly different kind of dance style, and they move in and out too. Okay, so in terms of the narrative form of Karrabing films, we immediately ran into this problem of like the set narrative of, you know, you have to have a main person in which the audience will. Yeah, well, not only the authorship, but like on the screen, like someone said, who's going to be the star? And we're like, everybody was like, everybody's going to be the star. And we were told, you can't do that. So it was like, well, how do we narratively have this form of narration that how do we force it to fit this other, I'm happy to call it ensemble style, that is. And so that's one of the things we try and do. In terms of improvisational realism, a similar thing happens. So the stories are, someone in the group comes up with the basic idea of a story. Then everyone else who wants to throws in their 2 cents, or shoves it, or says, no, we can't do that, or that's too simple, we have to put in these more complex things. And so the entire narrative is, if you want, a collective twisting and contorting based on the different opinions of everybody, and everybody's got different opinions. And then when we go to shoot, there's then the content of the scenes are improvised. So we have a basic idea once everybody's done with their opinions, and then we just start. And a similar thing happens, like we'll start going, we think the story's going one way, but let's say someone in the group wants to join in that day. Yeah. Whoop, we're going over there, right? So the everything about it kind of improvisational along. Now, in terms of the crediting, it's super interesting because a similar thing goes on with crediting. Everyone wants to say, I want what I do specifically or what I like saying I am to be on the credits. So, and people can't be on the credits unless they did something. That's this group decision for a lot of reasons. But we are also us. So individual and us, which takes, and then I'll be done, takes us back to this problem you're bringing up about I and we, right? And it seems like you're describing, and I would say my colleagues' world works with a very different understanding of what is meant by I and we. So in the West, you have this sovereign I, and then you have the national we, which is sovereign, right? So you have the singularity of sovereignty thought of as a singularity, which can be particular or massified. And then you have that colonial way of imposing kind of the mass subject on the primitive mind that you saw in Durkheim, in which our we is this unfolding of futurity. In the West, Durkheim, our we, right? In a organic solidarity, and their we is this like obeying the culture in a kind of whatever he called it. I don't know which one it is, to be honest. I can't remember. One's mechanical, one's organic. And I think what Karrabing is trying to do is say, we have a very radically different understanding of the relationship between Ron, which is Creole, like Ron. Like everybody's very stubborn and nobody bosses anybody. There's no bosses. But Ron and connected. You can't be your own self. You can't do what you want to do or you have to do, say in ritual, without already being obligated outside yourself. And that's this form of connectivity that they would say is true of Western capitalism too, but Western capitalism thinks it continually suck out what it actually is dependent on, what the condition of it is, without being affected. And, in Mermaids, one of the arguments is, at some point, you're going to suck out so much that there's nothing left for you to constitute yourself out of, right? And that's a crisis we're in. Yeah. So I think I loved it. I would want to hear more about the I and we.
Well, it's very, it's interesting to have these two presentations here today, but I think the ways in which we work are very different for very different reasons, because of with a different set of criteria or specificities according to where we're working. Also I think initially, because Karrabing, you are a family, so there's already it's a very different set of entanglements. People that live together, that share their lives together, that eat together. This is a group of friends who kind of came together. And the way in which we understand this idea of a we doesn't have any kind of, I suppose in some ways there is, I don't know if you feel it like that, but a sort of family pressure as well. So people can break off whenever they like and escape the we and do what they want. So a lot of the people in the group have individual practices. Like Zach, for example, he's called Mimetek. He's in another collective as well, which is a slam collective. And that's why we like this thing of ensemble, because it's this idea of together. So it's when we are together is when we try and create this we as such. But then that breaks apart and we're very separate. So then the way in which we work together as a group when we're making the films is completely different, because it's not such a familiarity or everyday situation comes into how the work gets made. So in that sense, it's completely different. And for us, I suppose, well, let me try and speak a bit about the way in which we actually construct scenes, for example, because I think it's probably quite different from Karrabing. Because there's always a process of, it's not that scene there, for example, that you saw of Leo and James talking about Spiral. This actually came from two separate conversations that we had with James separately and Leo separately. And then there's a scene prior to this where James is explaining what he thinks the spiral is to Leo. And then this is Leo's response to that. But that kind of response between those two people is actually fictional. they never had that conversation, obviously, but actually it was from fragments of things that we'd heard. So, for example, we're in a bus and we're just talking as we do, and then someone talks about spirals, and then we say, hey, later, like a few days later, Leo was like, actually, I'm quite interested to do something about spirals. So then we say, okay, but then can you think of it? So then he goes home that night and he writes down his sort of conception of the spiral, which he then comes to the next day with this kind of vague script, which is then completely improvised around. And then the decision to then put that scene into practice comes through the group. So then they say, well, then perhaps that could be in response to James, or perhaps that could be in response to such and such. So the decisions are made as a group, for example, but then the individuals from that might break off and then go and make a scene, if that makes any sense. So in that sense, it's a constant, I suppose, toing and froing, because also I think these people are living in maybe a more similar conception of sovereignty to a collective mass that's come from colonial France, basically.
Yeah, that's why there's not the idea of collective, or ensemble. Yeah,
it's not this idea. I mean, because and they're not living in a family either, so it's not the same.
Yeah, the family, the kinship, marriage, grounding, coursing through Karrabing is super interesting and important, and it's something that we've noticed. Like, it's like, there are other collectives that aren't organized this way. But it's not as if the family is this, like, we're the family, we're the family. This is my Italian, we're the family, right? In fact, those seven dreaming groups that I talked about, there are a lot of people in those seven, like barramundi or muddy, that saltwater fish. There are, I don't think hundreds. Well, there might be hundreds. There's a lot of Berber, Bigfoots, and Edmonds. Not everyone's in Karrabing. Ditto with long yam. Ditto with and even within a family. So I'll call my brother's family, like Trevor, who is in Mermaids. He's the older guy taking Aiden, if you saw it, taking Aiden through this devastated landscape. He has 2 sisters and a brother. None of them are in Karrabing, because they're just not. Why? Because Karrabing was a particular knotting within a set of knots, right? And so it's a particular way in which a group of people, since they've been young, are connected through kinship, became connected through marriage, which became knotted together in a more intensified way after this riot. So they found themselves. So that it's just talk about spiraling knotting in which the finding of like, here-ish we are with all these other potential, right? And then the Karrabing emerged as then a concept like, here-ish here. Why? What do we think this is, such that it tells us how we got here and what we think should be, what we think is and thus should be, right? So that's important.
It's also important that I think those 2 ideas of the knot of the spiral, and it has a very different understanding of tension and pressure. Yeah. So a knotting and entanglement is entirely different from a spiraled coming together, because which is why I say that, because I think it's deeply important to recognize, obviously, how the Karrabing is a series of knots, whereas what we've created is not a knot. Anyways, sorry. Mirna,
I was wondering, because I really didn't know that, so the Karrabing Film Collective, on the members, are not of the same dreamings.
No, that's what I'm just sorry. Okay. There's a lot I have to run through. I don't know what it's like. Yes. 101. This can take us like 7 days, but no, it's Karrabing is composed of, I think there's 7, there might be 8, different dreamings, which are in different places in the landscape that are connected different ones are connected in different ways by different stories. So it's not just there's 7 and those are connected by a story. It's like all these mutual potential networks, right? That then Karrabing kind of pulled back together to create and to create in a more reflexive way what was already going on, right? And thus Karrabing says, roan, so different members have their own dreaming, right? But the condition of but the condition of the viability of, and a dreaming is a thicker ancestral present, so it's not just it's it, me, here-ish, is premised on my obligation, your obligation to me through all these other connections. And thus it is explicitly counter to both a state and a kind of modernist anthropological imaginary that, as Rex Edmonds puts it, is always just trying to snip and just create these little sovereign clusters that collaborate maybe with each other, right? And so, I mean, I actually think collaboration is much more complicated than that, but just as a way of trying to get to what's at stake here. And that's why it has a more complex relationship to I and we, because they're not just scalar. It's not like I here and then we. It's I and we in an extension and a co-constituted existence. And that's what everyone believes existence is, what it is. And also they think that capitalism and liberal governance is also that, but since capitalism refuses to say that its condition is through these very complex extractive knottings, and that it thinks it can just suck everything out and remain itself, that it is itself, and that it can suck everything out of the world and remain itself, when that's just madness. You know, you can't exist as an enclosed thing. Yeah. So it's the explicit nature of the politics, and thus the filmmaking. Like, you know, everybody has their style and their camera. Everybody who knows who's doing the camera, and we just have to edit it and make it work out. The ideas, you know, that was my idea, but Celia once said of the dog film that we're doing. An interview, and they were interviewing Cecilia Lewis, who in some ways she's the MacGuffin. She starts everyone trying to find Cecilia. And so an interviewer asked her, and they said, she said, how'd this story start? And she said, well, everybody was homeless. I was the first one to get a house after we became homeless. And then everyone was overcrowding in my house, and it was so stressful. And so the interviewer said, so this is your story? She said, yeah, it's my story, but it's all of our stories in the different ways they're connected into them. So it's just a constant pushing back of the creation of the singularity or the mass subject.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned now the relation of course the government and the governmental within the land, and especially in relation to dreamings. I think in your book Geontologies, you go into you mentioned this story about 2 women sitting down, and this relation to, or this legal case with this company. So maybe that also can give us an idea of just the way in which, you know, the state kind of is their relation to of course to the indigenous practices, their lives, their habits.
Well, this would be maybe also really interesting to try and think about the different ways that both the long arm of colonialism and the very present breath and fingers of it manifest in Haiti versus, say, in Australia, and thus maybe why ensemble or collectivity takes the form it takes in these places, right? And also can be like when these two spaces are listening to, because I was thinking, I'm totally taking this, because we're doing a hip hop thing, and I'm like totally taking this film, and we're taking it and we're stealing it and borrowing, influenced by it, right? Because it's not going to be the same. So yeah, poaching. So it's not the because that long arm and the always present ongoing dispossession, to use Glenn Coulthard's words, manifests in different ways in these different spaces. The question is, how do we think ensemble, collectivity, or various other ways of describing these? You would say spiral, I would say not. Shape. And in Australia, the long arm of colonialism, and then the much more present continuing arm is it was based on what I would call Gianto power, which is now something that, you know, whether you call it Gianto power, I don't care whether you, I mean, definitely call it after me, so I'm cited everywhere, but I don't really care. But it's now something that the sciences, Western sciences, Western philosophy, Western critical theory are noticing now. But was a form of power that was always in your face if you were indigenous in Australia. And that form of power says that there is both an ethical, natural, and political difference between those things that come into existence as non-life, like rocks, and those things that come into existence as life, that is, things that are born, can have the potential to reproduce from inside themselves, and this can die. So all are, you know, Western ontology and Western ethics about, you know, life and finitude and being and Dasein, all of this, or bios and Zoe and, you know, et cetera, all gain their drama around that division, the terror of the inert, right? And thus with, like, we're going to all become deserts in the Anthropocene. That division, which in the West for a very long time was really thought to be a philosophically original position, and a division that positioned the sciences, so geology, biology, et cetera. So it was a division that was seen as both philosophically necessary and scientifically necessary. If you were indigenous, was always nothing necessary. It was just a mode of governance, right? And in early colonialism, it was a mode of governance that justified the extermination of people. They're so primitive, they worship rocks, right? So it was a means of extermination, the legitimation of extermination. And then when liberalism becomes also self-reflexive, it's a means of governing difference insofar as you demand that the authentic indigenous subject show that they believe this crazy thing that rocks can listen, right? And then if you can really show that you really, really believe it, then those who are governing you go, wow, what must it be to be like you? Because it only works if you don't believe that rocks are entangled existence. If you believe it, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool, right? So it doesn't have that power to govern in that liberal sense. And all of these, and that's one form of division. The other is the clan. So there's multiple. It's not just a singularity. You know, as we spiral. As we do our research, we find more. As we do our art, we do our research. We find out more things. So, but the mode of colonialism in Haiti was not the same. I mean, it was French, and it was not Anglo.
And also, I mean, the way in which, I mean, I think the big difference too is that obviously, so Haiti was a French colony. I mean, I should have maybe given a teeny bit of background earlier for some people who maybe don't know, but Haiti is on the eastern part of a piece of land in the Caribbean. On the Never Eat Shredded Wheat, western part. Yeah, East of Dominican Republic.
Check.
Yeah, I always get East and West mixed up. It's on the western side, on the left side. Of an island that was ruled by the French and the Spanish, and then in 1791 was the sort of beginnings of decades prior there was a continued process of slave revolt against the French plantation system, And then in 1791 was the sort of most important moment of kind of self-organization of different groups of slaves that were organizing the revolts. And then this kind of paved the way, opened up for the Haitian Revolution, which then, you know, was effectively a kind of civil war between people that were trying to force themselves out of slavery and the French state. And it ended in 1803, and then 1804 they write the Haitian Constitution. Now, first off, the Haitian Constitution, I mean, it was written in French. It's written in the colonial language. And it's sort of in some, I mean, it's very different from, but also similar to, in some respects, sort of post-revolutionary French ideals of sort of universalist ideals, and they created the first Black Republic in the Americas. However, you know, Dessalines actually gets assassinated a few years later, and what happens is a sort of political ruling class insert themselves into power and start running the country, and that's actually the same political class that the Haitians at this moment are currently really, I mean, violently protesting against. People are being killed by the police in the streets at the moment. And I think what's happened in Haiti is that, unfortunately, there was this sort of configuration of a political system that had somewhat borrowed its modes of conduct from French democracy, basically, which at that time, even though it was a republic, it established a kind of aristocracy within the republic, led by different leaders. And the same thing happens in Haiti, and then now there's this huge division between the individual, the I, who is the sovereign that rules the country, not as a king, but as a president, and then this sort of collective mass of people. So in that sense, it's a very different political construct, and this is something that's quite, you know, common throughout the Caribbean. And I think this is why Glissant has been so obsessed with this relationship of the I to the we. It's why Glissant is so obsessed with the figure of Toussaint Louverture, because Glissant, as much as he's fascinated in the possibility of writing the novel of the we, he's obsessed with these figures. He has this kind of idealized figure of the runaway slave. And he actually thinks of Louverture as a runaway slave. He thinks of Louverture as as like a very important kind of maroon. So Glissant is obsessed with this figure who has the sort of foresight, destiny, power, ability, I don't know what the words could be, to separate themselves from the collective, to push the collective might forwards to achieve a political gain. And that's kind of what happened in Haiti, for example, which in conversations we've had with many Haitians too, which they think is a great problem because they undermine the importance of the decades of resistance of the maroon communities who had already been poisoning plantation owners, burning down crops. Like, there was huge collective action. And Louverture and Dessalines were people that kind of pushed those actions to the fore. They established the first Black Republic in the Americas, but for the sake of then re-establishing, I mean, Louverture was famous for reinserting plantation slavery, which he did as a form of like military, it was like soldiers in the military had to work in the cane fields to produce sugar, to make money for the continued possibility of life under the new rulership. But people fought against that. And then later, I mean, it goes on and on and on. If you read also the history of Henri Christophe, who was the first like, emperor and king of Haiti, I mean, it gets even worse and more thickened. And so in that sense, anyway, sorry, to get back to what you're kind of saying in a way, it's an entirely different conception of like entirely different worldview, an entirely different view of the, I mean, and I'm talking specifically about people living in the urban areas in Haiti, because we've spent time in the countryside and it has a very different system and set of ways of living, different forms of governance, a lot more organized around the voodoo religion, which still nonetheless has the central figure of the Ugan, of the main priest. But in the urban areas in Port-au-Prince, it's still very much organized on that principle. And this is what people are trying to struggle against at the moment, because this is a continual form of domination of, well, people who are still basically subaltern to other Haitians.
Yeah, and this is why.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's exactly.
Which is very different from
Yeah,
Australia.
exactly. And that's why, at least, I think all of us, definitely me, are very hesitant, because people say, how is this modular? How are what you guys are doing modular? And Rex Edmonds once said, it's modular, I mean, not a word, like how does a model? And he said, it's a model, I think, in the way in which, like, whoever's doing something should ask themselves, who do you want to stay, and who do you not want to become, or something like that, he said. And that's why the kind of Foucauldian, like, God bless Foucault and all that, but the Foucauldian problematic of how I not be governed like this is very indicative of the specificity of location not in a simple, like, white French guy there, but rather that the grounds of at least what he thought his conditions were was just to change. And where it sounds like, though differently, and depending where you are in Haiti, differently, definitely in Australia, there's a doubleness that's, I'm sure it's a tripleness and quadrupleness, but anyways, let's just say double for now, of no, wanting to stay the same. And that's a really hard creative act if your world's always being torn apart. There's no more there's no better, what's that adjective where you intensify the noun? There's nothing more creative, that's it. There's nothing more creative than to try and maintain yourself in a system which daily, big event, small event, no even event, is tearing you apart at the material fabric, right? And all of the Karrabing films are about that. I mean, and so you really see the authorship of the specificity here, in which it's like, no, we're trying to keep this in place, right? In which, the kids and the kids have really grown up, right? And it's really done its job. It's focused us on sometimes a disagreement, but at least a disagreement about who you might be if you believed X, Y, or Z, or embodied X, Y, or Z. Like embodied, yes, dogs made those holes. Yes, there are mermaids. Yes, yes, yes. Versus if you go, no way, I'm not that kind of person, right? So there's now I'm completely lost where I am. We're all lost in space. No, but we're spiraling around. The specificity, what the hell was I talking about?
I don't know, but it was good. Just start rapping.
I know, start wrapping around it, but the jazz it up. Wow.
Or do you want to open to the audience, maybe?
Open to the audience who maybe remember what the hell
maybe the audience knows.
About.
Can anyone pick up where we left? Or do you have a new question? Something that...
Any question at
something
all.
that we didn't hear.
Thank you. To both of you, and rather vaguely, the notion of the we that is at the heart of any form of collective endeavor, gathering, ensemble, in the aid of doing, is also the conjunction of a set of conditions which you both talked about, and which I think these days, this is where we work from, conditions, not knowledges and so on. But at the same time that it's a set of conditions, it also intensifies around what Jean-Luc Nancy, I think, who's somebody I've learned a lot from, says, what law do we face, right? The examples that he brings are European examples, but he says, Roma Gypsy of Slovenia. What law can Roma Gypsy of Slovenia face? Not Roma law, not Slovenian law, not international law. And therefore, the sort of the moments that you were describing are these kind of conjunctions of an inner set of conditions and an almost impossible interface, not just with governance, but with the very possibility of facing the law. right? So in a way, they're also constituted out of that impossibility of facing the law. And and to me, that duality is what's really rich and powerful, not just conditions and not just inability to kind of face the law and fit within it, but the interplay between the two all the time, that they constitute one another.
I think that's super right, although I was about to say, therefore I'm going to say that I don't go to Nancy for other reasons, but we extract that from him, I'm fine. And it's important to note that, again, I say it, but I can say it too quick, I can think I said it and I didn't say it. Karrabing itself emerged from the two-ness of those conditions, right? There wasn't Karrabing before. There was an Emi word, Karrabing, karakal. You know, we knew what those words were. That's why we, had them to use them. Karrabing being that tied right out, and karakal being that tied right up. But there wasn't Karrabing people. There's still not quite Karrabing people, right? So it's not inward looking in that sense. So when I say maintenance, I don't mean maintenance of a knot that exists in and of itself that's affected, but itself is, the long arm, the close-up arm of these set of forces and practices against forces in which you can't turn to law, and you don't go backwards. And all the films, I do love them, because in all the films, there's no going. The dreamings are not in the backwardness. They're not in the thing we're maintaining that's abstracted out of this ongoing, shifting ensemble of forces. They're way not symbolic, right? They're always saying, in Mermaids, which good example now. In Mermaids, the mermaids have always been there. They were in the water hole when it wasn't toxic. But the story that Trevor tells of the mermaids, like the traditional story, is about when this one, and it's a true story, we know the guy, we know it happened. He captured a mermaid, and then he went to Mandora to go drinking. Well, Mandora is a pub. And he's drinking, and somehow he thinks that mermaid's going to wait for him. So it's also like, what is wrong with you? Mermaids don't wait for you to get drunk and come back. But so already that circuit's in there, and the mermaid's condition of staying uncaptured is inside the pub. And the mermaid in the present the mermaid is also working under the condition of its ancestral presence. So you put it more elegantly, but all I can say is I agree, and so do the other members, I think.
Do we have more comments, maybe? Questions?
Et voila.
I mean, I could just speak back quickly or just elaborate on something a bit different, which is not too much, like a minute.
No, it's fine.
No, just thinking about in relation to the project that we're doing and how it relates to, like, contemporary Haiti as well. And the way in which, I mean, after the revolution and the establishment, like, because also if you think in many ways, it's kind of like, 1804 is like, it's really the beginning of something there. It's like I hate the term, I can't think of a better term than ground zero. Like, how else do you say that? But this kind of like, this like starting point.
It's an event.
It's an event. I know, but quite literally. Within which, like any set of laws and conditions can be completely invented, because everything was flattened out. All the plantations were burnt. The French had all their heads cut off. Most, like the whites on the island, had been expelled, and the Haitians were there, and they decided to write a constitution, which is a set of laws through which they're going to start governing their people. And I think the thing that that causes such upset today, such disgust at the governance of Jovenel Moïse and previous people that have been, pushing Haiti through a different series of violent processes, neo-colonial processes, in connection with Americans, in connection with the United Nations, in connection with other different, governing forces that have tried to come into the country, is that the people, these sort of divisions do exist, this kind of collective mass who are governed by the laws that were written by these sort of first sovereigns of the island as such, that they found it astonishing that from within the space of slavery, there should then, become such a system of domination. And I think that's why the interest in sort of collective struggles and resistance, the fascination and interest of the young people I'm working with, for bringing up histories of sort of maroon collectivity and strategies of resistance that existed in the hills, in the forest, kind of away from the urban centers of the sort of revolutionary order, is precisely something we try to address through the work, through the long 3-hour version, which you will see in August when it comes out in all big multiplex cinemas. We specifically try to discard, we lose Toussaint. So the film has this movement, it has this sort of trajectory where we begin with this figure, which we saw yesterday, bring breath to the death of rocks, this part that opens the film with this one character who represents this figure who's haunted by this ghost, this hero. And that hero gets, and his laws and his constitution, even though he wrote it with Dessalines, but it's Dessalines that really puts it forwards because Louverture's in captivity. Through the play, through the film we're making, they start to sort of dissipate into a collective mass. And that's where this idea of this voice, this sort of choral voice comes in, which is how that individual gets sort of disintegrated into the very fabric and matter of the group that are working together. And then as the film moves on through time, whatever, we end up with a sort of multiplicity of voices. And that really is quite an important thing, not for me to do, but for the Haitians to do today in Haiti, in response to the way in which the country is being governed by people because there really is a huge division between this extremely wealthy, very small percentage of French-speaking elite. I mean, they speak Creole, but they prefer to speak in French-speaking elite, and then the people who, are being left to, in Haiti, it's a very desperate situation. It's the poorest country in the Northern Hemisphere, and that system is being kept in place by this basically colonial elite. And why there's such kind of upset and disgust at that is because those people come from the heritage of the Black Republic, and this is the thing that they find very difficult to come to terms with, hence why people are burning cars, looting shops, fighting police, and this has been in Haiti since 1804, and it's continued. And the people, and I'm speaking to, like my friend Rossi now, and he says, and he's 30, he's lived through various different violent political situations. He said, right now it's the worst it's ever been. Anyway, sorry,
No, it's in this way, there's such simpatico in that difference. That is to neither be the law, the chief, the state, nor to be the mass that it projects, but rather to be, again, I always go to Linda, to be one's own, hey. Yeah. But that as conditioned by belonging, obligation elsewhere, which is, I think, what you're meaning by the multiplicity of roles that emerge at the end of the film, which we all look forward to seeing. Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe next year. Okay. Are we done?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.